So today I want to talk about my five favorite books about U.S. presidents that I have and that I've read. If you want to share with me yours, I would love to go through them, watch your videos, or just read your comments below. But make sure it's five books that you have or you've read before. I've actually picked books that I have already read at least once. Some of these I've read multiple times, and I would have no problem at all going back through and reading them again. So when you think about your list of your five, not necessarily in your opinion the five best, but the five that you just love and you would have no problem reading them another time and another time. So this is my five. These are not ranked in order of my favorites. I'm going from, I suppose, in order of the U.S. presidents. The first one for me is A. Lincoln by Ronald C. White Jr. Love this book. Big, huge, thick book. Everything you can read, not counting notes, is almost 700 pages. I've read this book through multiple times. It is very well broken in. But this is one of those books that not only is it very informative, a very good perspective on Lincoln by White, but it's such an easy read. Some books I find like this, they're maybe not the greatest read in the world. They're also, I don't know, their take is not always great. I look for stuff that is very informative, very well researched. I like a very balanced approach, and I feel like that he does a very good job of that, and also like something that's readable. So this is the first one on my list, is A. Lincoln by Ronald C. White Jr. I'll just read the little bit that's on the back here. Everyone wants to define the man who signed his name A. Lincoln. In his lifetime, and ever since, friend and foe have taken it upon themselves to characterize Lincoln according to their own label or libel. In this magnificent book, Ronald C. White Jr. offers a fresh and compelling definition of Lincoln as a man of integrity, what today's commentators would call authenticity, whose moral compass holds the key to understanding his life. Through meticulous research of the newly completed Lincoln legal papers, as well as of recently discovered letters and photographs, White provides a portrait of Lincoln's personal, political, and moral evolution. A transcendent, sweeping, passionately written volume that expands our knowledge and understanding of its subject, A. Lincoln will engage a whole new generation of Americans. And I guess if that generation was talking about my generation, I suppose it's worked. So this one is the first one on my list. The second one on my list, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. It's not about a very well-known president. President Garfield, From Radical to Unifier by C.W. Goodyear. This one actually came out just in the last few years, unless time's getting away from me. Yeah, copyright 2023. This book's only, at the time of this video, only a couple years old. But I read it, and really part of what drew me to this book is I'd never read a book about Garfield before. Garfield's religious upbringing also has ties to the kind of my religious background as well. My day job is I'm a preacher for a congregation of the Churches of Christ. Not the United Churches of Christ, that's a different group, but this is the Churches of Christ. Most of them you find kind of across the Bible Belt in the United States. His background kind of has some connections as well, kind of in the same area. So that's sort of what motivated me to pick this up and read it. But as I read it, what I found out is this is someone who it really accidentally, in some ways, became president. There was a lot of other people, and no one could agree on who they wanted, and so he almost kind of by default became the guy. But did a lot of his work in Congress, and so a tremendous legislator who found himself in the presidency and unfortunately did not get to remain in the presidency very long because he was gunned down by a lunatic. but a very good, well-written, well-researched story on President Garfield. And really, because there's not a lot of time in the office, you learn a lot about his life and the things that he did, legislation leading up to the presidency. A very good book, and one that I need to go back and reread. President Garfield, From Radical to Unifier by C.W. Goodyear. This third book, I have read it, and oh, I love it. And I'm glad I found a very good used copy of it. Hardback, The Accidental President, Harry S. Truman in the 4 Months That Changed the World by A.J. Bami. I hope I'm saying the name right. But this book follows the first 4 months of Truman's presidency pretty much day by day. And I love this book so much. You think about the time that he came into the world, that he came into power in the world as the president. As the vice president, he discovered very, very quickly that Roosevelt's health was not good at all, and he knew it was just a matter of time before he became president of the United States. In fact, pretty much anyone who was close to Roosevelt knew it was just a matter of time before this fellow was president. And the decisions that he had to make in his first 4 months in office were monumental to what was happening then and to even influencing the world that you and I live in today. And it just fell in his lap because Roosevelt died of a massive stroke or an aneurysm, essentially. And he became president and had to start dealing with Stalin and an aging Churchill, and had to make the decision about the atomic bomb. All these decisions were made in the opening days of his presidency. And he was not really brought up to speed on a lot of this stuff because Roosevelt was really notorious about leaving kind of his vice presidents in the dark. And so in the dark, he had to be brought up to speed on all of that. And I think Truman, history has borne this out. I would say Lincoln and Truman are my two favorite presidents. That's, I'd say that's true for a lot of people. But just what they had to deal with. The fact that they were not really born to, I guess, elite families, and that they became such successful presidents, that to me has always stood out. They were relatively normal folks from normal families, from normal parts of the world, and they went on to be some of the greatest presidents that the United States has ever had. The Accidental President is one of my favorites, and really need to go back and reread it. I read this one recently. This one is not in nearly as good a shape, but I'm really glad that I found it. Plain Speaking, an oral biography of Harry S. Truman by Merle Miller. As you can see, the outer cover there has seen better days. But the copyright of this book, I came across it in a used bookstore. Just got it for a few dollars. Copyright 1973, 1974 by Merle Miller. This is like the transcript of multiple interviews that Merle Miller did with Harry S. Truman, much later in Truman's life. As you can see from the picture there, he's an older man. But it's just all of these interviews about all of these different subjects, different people, different situations, and it's just Truman in his just down-to-earth, common folk speak. It's not polished up. It's just, here's the way it is. Really interesting read. Truman has no problems in this book sharing who he likes and who he doesn't like. He's not very fond of those who came after him in office. Believe mainly he's speaking of Eisenhower, and I think he also says some stuff about Nixon in this too. Not very fond of them. And he was not shy about sharing that he was not very fond of them. Very interesting book. I think in the way that kind of the office of the president is used today, it's sort of almost like this boys club almost. Like they may criticize each other for the most part, but they don't. They're very kind of, buddy-buddy with each other in a lot of ways. So what you find here, you don't really find anymore. And so to me, this is very, very interesting in looking at his own stuff, but even in the way things have developed afterward, after Truman. This is my fourth book. And then fifth and finally, remember, these are books that to me are my personal favorites. I've read this multiple times, and I suppose this is the only one out of all of these that's more of an autobiography, but Decision Points, George W. Bush. Reason for this is I was 10 years old when 9/11 happened. And you can imagine how influential and impactful that moment and the following days, weeks, and months were on my life. The vast majority of my life, there has been major conflicts in the Middle East and kind of the fallout from all of that. And a lot of it tracing up to and back to 9/11. And so I find this period of history, we're almost too close to it to really investigate it thoroughly and maybe a more of a non-biased take on it. But I find reading about the decisions he had to make, I find it, I guess, something that just helps me understand the period of time that has influenced me tremendously. It helps me to understand it. And so while this is certainly not a non-biased or balanced look at his presidency, he's obviously, and unashamedly so, he's extremely biased toward his own point of view. I appreciate the take of George W. Bush, President Bush, in this book. So those are my five favorites that I have read. Like I said, several of these I have read multiple times, and if I have time, one of these days, I'm probably going to read all of these again multiple times. So I'd be interested to read in the comments or to watch your videos. What are your 5 favorite books about a U.S. president? Look forward to hearing it. Until then, y'all take care. Have a good rest of your day.